Good evening, everyone. Happy Hanukkah, Hanukkah Sameach. This week's Parsha is Parshasmikates, Tufshin Pei Beis. I'd like to dedicate tonight's learning in memory of my mother, Mrs. Shalamis Rabinowitz, Shalamis Bas Rabbi Yaakov Eliezer. So tonight we're going to talk a little bit about Parshasmikates, and then we're going to talk a little bit about Hanukkah. So regarding Parshasmikates, we find that the parsha begins with Pharaoh having his dream about the 7 skinny cows swallowing up the 7 fat cows, the 7 skinny ears eating the 7 fat ears. He has a dream, and there's no one that can interpret it. The Sarah Mashkim, the wine butler, tells Pharaoh about Yosef, who he had met in the dungeon, who interpreted his dream, and Pharaoh calls for Yosef. So now, Perek Mem Aleph, chapter 41, Pasuk Tez Zayin, verse 16. V'yemer Pharaoh el Yosef. Pharaoh said to Yosef, Chalom chalamti u'foiser einoisai. I had a dream, and there's no one that can interpret it. V'nishmati olech chalem. I've heard about you saying, Tishma chalem, that you can hear a dream, liftar oisai, to interpret it. Vayan Yosef es Pharaoh lemar. Yosef responds to Pharaoh saying, Beladai, it's not me. Elokim Ya'aneh Eshalem Paroi, God shall respond to the welfare of Pharaoh. And there Pharaoh tells him his dream. So when Yosef responds and says, it's not me, did Pharaoh ask him a question that Yosef was to respond to? When Pharaoh says, I've heard about you that, and I've heard about you, which the wine butler told him, that you hear dreams to interpret, it's not really a question. The wine butler told him. Is this a question? Was Pharaoh waiting for a response? Was this a lead into Yosef confirming? Or was the Yosef interrupting? Where Pharaoh says, I've heard it, meaning Pharaoh says, why you're here. I've had a dream and I understand, I know, I've heard that you interpret dreams. And Pharaoh is about to tell him his dream, and Yosef says, no, it's not me. So there are commentaries that understand that Pharaoh was not asking a question, it was not waiting for any confirmation from Yosef, but rather Yosef interrupted. Because as soon as Pharaoh said to him, I've heard about you, that you interpret dreams, Yosef says, it's not me, it's God, it's Hashem. So let's imagine ourselves in Yosef's shoes. Here he is, just pulled out from jail, standing in front of the mightiest ruler in the known world, a man that he knows firsthand threw his servants into jail for a little mistake. The wine butler, the baker, there were little mistakes. Nonetheless, they were thrown into jail, and the baker was hung for it. So Yosef now interrupts Pharaoh, and he says, no, it's not me. Seems a bit reckless, maybe even dangerous to do that. Pharaoh says, I want you to interpret my dream. I understand you interpret dreams. And Pharaoh Yosef interrupts and says, no, it's not me. Seems a bit reckless. Well, the answer seems to be that Yosef was not going to allow that Pharaoh should say, I understand you interpret. He wasn't going to allow himself to get any of the credit. So he immediately interrupted and said, it's God. Clearly, to do that, either it takes guts, which could be guts is not really enough to put yourself in possible danger for, but it's a sign of Yosef's bitachon, Yosef's trust in Hashem, that he's not afraid to basically stand up for the glory of Hashem, even in the presence of the great and mighty Pharaoh, who could take off his head in any second if he didn't like the way he responded or interrupted. Yosef has no compunctions about saying what he says because he has his bitachon, he has his trust in Hashem, that Hashem will take care of him. And there are commentaries that point out that Yosef's response here was really an atonement. He was making up for something that he fell short of. The Parsha begins, Vahi Miketz Shnasayim Yom. It was at the end of 2 years. And the Medrash tells us that Yosef landed up being in jail for 12 years. He was supposed to be for 10, but he landed up remaining for another 2 years because when the wine butler had the dream, and Yosef interpreted the dream that the wine butler will return to his position in front of Pharaoh, he asked the wine butler to remember him. He said, remember me, because there's no reason for me to be in this jail. I was kidnapped and thrown into here for no reason. He asked the wine butler for help. The Medrash says that was not appropriate for Yosef to do. He should not have looked for any help. He should have just remained with his trust and his hope in Hashem. And because of that, he remained in jail for 2 more years. And the commentaries ask, what did Yosef do wrong? We know there's an obligation of what we call hishtadlus. You don't just rely on God and don't do anything on your own part. You have to put in your efforts, and you know that your efforts are not going to determine your fate or your fortune. It's all Hashem. But we're obligated to put in our hishtadlus. We're obligated to put in our efforts. So what did Yosef do wrong? So some answer that Yosef actually was expected to be on a higher level, on a level of complete bitachon, on a level of complete trust in Hashem without putting in any efforts. Why? Because Yosef's entire survival up to this point was clearly miraculous. His success, his survival, his success, it was all miraculous. And therefore, if Yosef sees that Hashem is dealing with him in a miraculous way, not in a natural way, in a supernatural way, then Yosef has to now also act in that same way and put his full trust in Hashem. And therefore, when he asked for help from the wine butler, that was inappropriate on his part, because he should have he should have not have done anything and just put his full trust and reliance on Hashem. Here, Yosef made up for that. Because Yosef didn't remain silent because I don't want to aggravate the king. I don't want to upset the king. Yosef stood up for the honor of Hashem without being concerned about that, because he put his full reliance on Hashem. Even though perhaps under normal circumstances, he shouldn't be this would be reckless. For Yosef, that's okay. For Yosef's not being reckless. Yosef has complete trust in Hashem. He puts his full reliance on Hashem. And this is where Yosef made up for the bitachon that he failed to display beforehand. So therefore, Yosef's ability to do this, or the fact that Yosef did it, wasn't reckless on his part, but rather Yosef is the kind of person, and there are individuals that way, that can put their full reliance on God, and that's what he did here, and made up for the lack of bitachon of trust in Hashem they displayed before when he asked the wine butler for help. Now we can add to this the fact that for Yosef to display this kind of reliance on Hashem is something that would be quite normal for him. Because in last week's Parsha, when Yosef is first sold to Egypt, it says that Yosef, whatever Yosef did, he was sold to Potiphar. He was sold to one of Pharaoh's servants, Potiphar, one of Pharaoh's officers, Potiphar. And whatever he did, he was successful with. So the pasuk reads in last week's Parsha, his master saw that God was with him. Whatever he does, Hashem gives him success. What does it mean that his master saw that God was with him? So Rashi comments on those words. He saw that Hashem was with Yosef because he saw that the name of God was a familiar word in his mouth. Yosef was always talking about God. The Medrash elaborates what that means is like this, that for anything that Yosef did, he blessed Hashem himself. He was saying it to himself, Baruch Hashem, Baruch Hashem. He was probably davening to Hashem for success and was thanking Hashem for the success. And the master sees he's constantly mumbling something. So his master noticed and asked him, what are you saying? Yosef responded, I am blessing God. The master responded, really? I'd like to see him. Yosef replies, the son is one of his many servants, and you can't gaze at that. How can you expect to gaze at his glory? But Yosef was constantly blessing Hashem. Anything that he did, he blessed Hashem. And the master saw it. And that was where his success came from. Yosef constantly lived in the presence of Hashem, because he knew everything that he was doing, every move that he was doing was in Hashem's hands, and Hashem was bringing him the success, and he recognized that. But this is if the master notices this, he noticed, and as Rashi says, the name of God was a familiar word in his mouth. He's saying it often. And we know the more you say something, the more of impression it makes on a person. So Yosef lives with Hashem. If Yosef lives with Hashem, and therefore, for Yosef to have his trust in Hashem, for Yosef, it's natural. He lives in the presence of Hashem constantly. Nonetheless, when he came to the situation with the wine butler, he thought still that he has to do his ishtadlus. He thought that he has to put in his efforts. This is what we're supposed to do. So he thought for himself also, yes, he knows Hashem is present in everything that he does. Hashem is with him in everything that he does, but he still has an obligation to put in his ishtadlus, to put in his effort. And that was his mistake. He didn't need to because, as we said, that should be clear to him that his miraculous survival means that if this is how Hashem deals with him on a regular basis in a miraculous way, then his obligation is to relate to Hashem in a similar way, in a way that is without effort but full reliance on Hashem. But once he learns his lesson, and now he stands in front of Pharaoh, and he realizes from his past experience that his batach and his trust needs to be on a higher level of reliance, for Yosef, it's quite natural, because he's always been living that way. Even in the midst of the idolatrous Egypt, even in the midst of Egypt called the Eretz Haaretz, the most immoral society that there was, Yosef made sure never to forget that everything that he does is dependent on Hashem. Now that Yosef is busy being a servant and everything like that in Mitzrayim, he realizes he needs to recognize, he has to remind himself, he has to be cognizant, especially here, of Hashem's presence in his life. And he did it. And therefore, at the point of time where it would seem to us that for Yosef to first of all have the presence of mind to be able to interrupt Pharaoh and to say, it's not me. And perhaps to say that he was permitted to do so, not being reckless, not endangering himself. For Yosef, it was natural, because Yosef always lived with Hashem in his presence. And he had learned his lesson that for him, for other people, they have to put in their ishtadlus, they have to put in their efforts. For him, his level is to put his full reliance on Hashem. Okay, that's the thought on the Parsha. Let me now share with you a thought regarding Hanukkah. So the holiday is called Hanukkah. Why is it called Hanukkah? So the commentaries explain that the word Hanukkah is really a contraction of two words. Ches Nun Vav, the first three letters of the name Hanukkah, is the word Chanu. They camped, they rested. The last two letters, Chav Hey, mean to represent the Hebrew way of writing the number 25, which is Chav Hey. The letter Chav numerically equals 20. The letter Hey is 5. Chav Hey is 25. Chanu Chav Hey. They rested on the 25th. On the 25th of Kislev, the Hashmonaim, the Maccabees, rested from war. They didn't have to fight their war anymore. They had taken back the Beis Hamikdash. Or they rested from that war. Historically, we know there were many wars following that. But they rested from their war of taking back Yerushalayim and taking back the Beis Hamikdash. Now, there's a question that's asked: if the name of Chanu Chav Hey means to say that we were victorious, then why doesn't the name focus on victory? Why does it focus on we didn't have to fight anymore? Why not focus on victory? And the answer that's given is because if we focus on victory, we may come to think that we were victorious. It was our military prowess, it was our guerrilla warfare that was able to conquer the mighty Greeks, which is a common mistake in the secular world. But rather, as we say in Al Hanisim, it was all Hashem. It's true. They had to put in their efforts. They had to do what they had to do to stand up for the honor of Hashem, to fight, to bring back the glory of the Torah of Hashem and His Torah to the Jewish people. They had to do things. The guerrilla warfare was their hishtadlus. That was the tactic they had to use, but that wasn't their success. Their success was miraculous. And we say that all the time when we say that in Al Anisim. You hand over the mighty into the weak. You handed over the many into the few. It was all Hashem. And therefore, we're not going to give a name of being victorious in war, but rather, we didn't have to fight war anymore. We didn't have to make war. We focus on what we gained from the war. The fact we didn't have to fight it anymore, which means that we now had the Beis Hamikdash. The commentary of the Parsha says the word Hanukkah, the reason why we call the holiday Hanukkah is because we know the word Hanukkah means to dedicate, which means that if you have something new that you want to bring into service, so you bring into service by utilizing it for that service, and that's how you dedicate it. That is how you dedicate it now for this service. When the Hashmonaim entered the Beis Hamikdash, we know they found the Beis Hamikdash in shambles. Everything had been made tamei, ritually impure, which was what led to the miracle of the oil, because all the oil present was impure, and they searched for pure oil, which they found. So the Talmud in Masechta Avodah Zarah explains that they came into the Beis Hamikdash and they set out repairing, and not just repairing, but purifying, being able to now bring what had become impure back into service. When it came to the Mizbeach, when it came to the altar that sacrifices were brought on, they couldn't do anything. They basically took it apart and they buried it. And they had to build a new one, which means they now had a new altar. A new altar has to be dedicated. Therefore, we call this holiday Hanukkah dedication, because when we are celebrating the fact that we got back the service of the Beis Hamikdash, we were now able again to bring the sacrifices and do the divine worship in the Beis Hamikdash, we call it by the name of dedication because that is what happened. They were able to dedicate a new altar in order to again begin the service in the Beis Hamikdash, which God returned to us through the miraculous war of Hanukkah. With this, we can give an explanation to a famous custom amongst the Jewish people. Why do we eat latkes on Hanukkah? The answer is because it's a food made with oil, and it's a way of our remembering the miracle of the oil. There is another common practice of sufganiyot, donuts, which again are supposed to be made, or originally were made, deep fried in oil. So Reb Shlomo Zalman Auerbach Zatzal gave an explanation as to why we eat sufganiyot, or I would say, is there a custom for the fried food to be these donuts? Again, for those who have that custom, which I think really originated in Israel. So it explains the following. We know that after we have bread, we recite Berchas Hamazon, the grace after meals, referred to as benching, which means thanking God, blessing God. That's what after bread, we do Berchas Hamazon. After we eat something that we make the bracha of mazonos over, we make what we sometimes refer to, we make what was referred to by the Talmud as bracha achas mein shalish, the one blessing that summarizes all three. We don't do a full Berchas Hamazon after we eat, let's say, cake or cookies, but rather we actually say a shortened version, one blessing that contains the ideas of all the other three blessings of Berchas Hamazon. When I say three blessings, referred to as three blessings because the Torah obligation of Berchas Hamazon is three blessings. The fourth is rabbinic. Okay, so after we have the mazonos, the bracha achrona, the after bracha, is commonly referred to as al hamichya. Okay. Now, when we say the Berachas Hamazon, we include in the third bracha, the third blessing of Rachem, the following words. Okay, and this is what we say. This is the English translation. Have compassion, Hashem, our God, on Israel, your people, on Jerusalem, your city, on Zion, the dwelling place of your glory, on the kingship of the house of David, your anointed, and on the great and holy house upon which your name is called. That's what we say in Berachas Hamazon. In the Al Hamichya bracha, in the one bracha that's the shortened version of the benching, we say similar words, but with one addition. Have compassion on Hashem, our God, and Israel, your people, on Jerusalem, your city, on Zion, the dwelling place of your glory, on your altar and your sanctuary. In the bracha achrona, we mention the altar. In Berachas Hamazon, we don't. So therefore, Rav Shlomo Zalman Auerbach suggested that the reason why we have the custom of eating the donuts is because after you eat the donut, you're going to make the bracha achrona, you're going to make the after bracha, which in it you will mention the mizbeach, the altar. That Hashem should have mercy to bring us back the altar. Hanukkah, which is named after the dedication of the new altar that had to be built for us to restart the service of sacrifice in the Beis Hamikdash. That's what the name of Hanukkah is about. So it's clearly a big focus on that. Therefore, we eat something that by which we'll be obligated to make the after bracha that will mention the altar, because that's what the name of Hanukkah is about, which means that's a main focus. The main focus of getting back the service is getting back the main part of the service, which is the sacrifices, which can only be brought because now we had a new altar, and therefore the custom became for the oily food to be the donuts, because after eating the donut, you make the al hamichya, and in that after bracha, you mention the mizbeach, which is what the name of Hanukkah, you mention the altar, which is what the name of Hanukkah is named after. Have a wonderful evening and a very happy Hanukkah.